This well-known anonymous rope-skipping rhyme was originally sung to the tune of Ta-ra-ra boom-de-ay.
Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, gave her father 41. Ta-ra-ra boom-de-ay, ta-ra-ra boom-de-ay, ta-ra-ra boom-de-ay, ta-ra-ra boom-de-ay.
This anonymous ballad was originally published as a broadside and sold in Boston. It probably began life as a poem. Lydia Sherman is plagued with rats. Lydia has no faith in cats. So Lydia buys some arsenic, and then her husband, he gets sick, and then her husband, he does die, and Lydia's neighbors wonder why. Lydia moves, but still has rats, and still she puts no faith in cats. So again, she buys some arsenic. This time, her children, they get sick. This time, her children, they do die. And Lydia's neighbors wonder, why? Lydia lies in Wethersfield jail, and loudly does she moan and wail. She blames her fate on a plague of rats. She blames the laziness of cats. But her neighbor's questions she can't deny. So Lydia, now in prison, must lie.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining Lizzie Tea and the Murder Podcast. Tonight we investigate the Lizzie case and Eli Bentz and prussic acid. We also will be talking about lady poisoners in the 19th century, and I want to welcome my co-host, historian, and fellow researcher, Shelley Dietzick. Thanks, Shelley, for coming. It's good to see you.
Hi, good to see you too. What's a good night for poison? It's pretty gloomy and rainy and stormy here in New England.
It is, and in New York also, there's like an overcast, and we've been having some really horrific thunderstorms in the last few weeks. But I see you're not in your normal setting. Interesting.
No, I'm actually at my daughter's house in her monster room. So the background's not too Victorian this time, but it's colorful.
Yes, yes, it is. So, our guest this evening is author of The Bloody Century: True Tales of Murder in the 19th Century America and Murder and Mayhem in Essex County, a history of capital crimes in Essex County, Massachusetts from the 1600s to the turn of the century. And he also does a blog of true crime, Murder by Gaslight. So we're very happy to have him on tonight, and Robert Wilhelm. Thanks, Robert, for being on.
Well, thank you for having me.
And your setting is beautiful too. Where are you broadcasting from?
I'm in the woods, the Adirondack woods, in the middle of the rain right now.
Ah, yeah. So it's thundering and raining everywhere.
Yeah, it is.
So I want to welcome all of you guys for tuning in. Without your support, we wouldn't have this podcast. And just so you know, we're no experts here. We're enthusiasts like you guys. We love the case. We welcome any insight or conversation or questions that you may have throughout the podcast. So join in. We'd love to hear from you. And tonight we're going to stray away a little bit from the usual question and answer thing that we usually do. We're just going to do a raffle at the end of the show, and we're going to be raffling off a couple items. One is from the Lizzie Borden shop. It is a collection of 7 trading cards, which that's what we have up to date. So you're going to get all 7. And Shelley, you have some to raffle? We're going to raffle off?
Oh yes, this was spinster tea. I don't know if you can see that. We have a picture of it later. There we go.
Oh,
It's got
that's
a little
beautiful.
silver hatchet, and it's for fall. It's cinnamon spice because we're getting ready for autumn up here.
Yeah.
The best time of year in New England.
Yeah, our tea expert couldn't make it tonight, so we're trying to help accommodate that. So we do what we can. So let's kick it off. I want to start by talking about your latest book, Robert.
The latest release is an audio version of The Bloody Century, and it's 50 true stories of murder in 19th century America. But it also includes musical selections, some murder ballads and poems put to music from the period.
I think we just played 2 of them in the opening,
Two
right?
of them, right?
Yeah,
That's right.
I love those songs. The first one we played was, I think the one that
Lizzie Borden. Yeah.
Yes. Didn't the
From
children,
Robert Wondering.
like when she lived in Maplecroft, didn't they sing that song outside of her house?
I think that song, that little ditty, plagued Lizzie throughout after her acquittal. And I believe it originally was an English drinking song, like a pub song that was popular. The tune was popular, and then you just
Everybody
fit
knew
the
the
words
tune.
in. That's right. Yeah. And I was going to mention, I never realized there were so many ballads and poems about famous murders until I read your book. I remember as a kid back in the 50s, there was Frankie and Johnny, a version of that on popular radio, one called Stagger Lee, and
Yeah.
then The Streets of Laredo. Pretty,
Tom
gutsy,
Dooley.
gory. Tom Dooley, yes, especially Tom Dooley. And I'm wondering, is that what got you interested in
Actually, yeah, it is.
researching?
I started researching the songs to see if there was any truth behind them, and most of them are based on true stories, but they're not very factual. The actual murders themselves don't follow the songs. They're more romanticized. The
Uh,
songs themselves.
and
Sort of
some
like
have come
sort
from
of-
poems, right?
Kind of like a folklore kind of thing, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So sometimes the names get changed and the circumstances get changed, and there's heroes and villains where maybe in this real story there's only villains.
Do you have a particular favorite ballad of all the many that you've researched and
Oh.
looked into?
It's hard to say because there's a lot of variety. Um, I like songs like Stagger Lee and Frankie and Johnny, Delia. But then there's the more country ones like Frankie Silver, Omi Wise. And there's still bluegrass performers still do those songs even though they're hundreds of years
Well,
old.
yeah, and there's something about country music even today. It tells a good story, a country
Hmm.
song, and like
Right.
the ballads, and I guess the tune was easy maybe to carry, and without all of this media we have today, it was a way of keeping the story alive, passing it on, maybe down through the generations. And
Right.
I don't know if you've ever heard "You Can't Chop Your Papa Up" in Massachusetts. I know the Kingston Trio
I
did
have heard
hang
that.
down. Yeah, so that's another. It's not exactly a ballad. It's very up tempo, but it's another story about the
Wasn't
Borden
that from a
case.
musical?
It was from
Wasn't that from a
Faces of 53. Faces
uh,
of 53 was the musical, and
1953?
1953. Um, but yeah, so that, and of course the Took an Axe, Lizzie Borden Took an Axe has been around a lot longer, but
Hmm.
um, it seems you just can't resist a good story. And I find it fascinating that that was your jumping off point for researching 19th century murders. And so you've named a
I didn't. I
few
didn't
of this.
realize. I didn't realize how much information was available on those old murders. There's pamphlets and books and newspaper accounts and magazine accounts.
Mhm.
So I realized there was much more than just was covered by the songs.
How
So
do you
that's when I
go
started to
about looking in?
compile them.
Yeah, how do you go about looking into that? Uh, where did you begin looking for material on the
Yeah,
I
internet,
what
usually
or?
what
start.
ye- I was going to say, what year did you decide? Because you cover from the 1600s up into the
For the
19th
yeah
century,
yeah for the Essex book I covered because it starts with the Pilgrims, but
which is fascinating in
normal
itself. Yeah,
it is and they
yeah,
had murderers too,
yeah.
um, but I
And
basically I go between 1800 and 1900 and just bookend it that way because there's just too much otherwise.
yeah, I was looking at some of your like the angle that I sort of feel and research as I'm reading your book, Shelley's book, or whomever writes about the 19th century, and it's funny, you started out in the 16th century with the Essex County book,
Hmm.
and I look at women because the topic is poison in women in the 19th century tonight, but even back in the 1600s, women actually had more rights then than they did in the 19th century. Back then, they were allowed to have land. They were allowed to vote. They were an essential part of survival back then.
But
They were needed.
they still had a lot of rules they had to live by, especially regarding pregnancy
Right.
and marriage. And some of the some of the Puritans, the women went a little bit crazy, killed their children, killed their husbands, things like that.
Right.
Why do
Right.
you think they did that, though? What was the motivation uh, back then? Is it they were just depressed, melancholy?
I think there were
Oh,
a lot of responsibilities laid on them, you know, by the society. I mean, it was in some
mhm.
senses it was freer, but in other senses it was dominated by the church, and it was a
Right.
very strange church because they believed in demons
Right.
and
And I'm sorry, Robert. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, that's right. So like it ends up with the Salem witch trials, and those were all young girls turning on women and accusing mostly women, also men, but accusing them of witchcraft.
Right. If a woman, though, had a baby out of wedlock, she was cast out from society at large, and her child would be designated a bastard child. So I think that was one of the reasons, because like where would she live? Her husband, she couldn't, she had to fend for herself. And most of the times I would think that, she would largely end out on the street all alone and suffer, right?
Yeah. If her parents took her in, that's where she would go. But often they did end up prostitutes.
Right, right, which is,
Tough life. Well, yeah, tough life, like Mary Ann Cotton in England. Of course, now we're moving into the 19th century. But
Hmm.
um, Robert, did you notice when you were doing research on some of these poisoning cases,
hey,
a
Sharon.
lot of, a lot of the women uh, came from very sad childhoods. A parent had died, they were tossed around from relative to relative, very insecure, not loved, not nurtured. I'm thinking of
And it
Jane
didn't
Toppan.
change. It didn't change when they were married. They were not treated well by
E-
their husbands.
exactly,
And
that's a good point. Yeah, yeah, and so it was almost, you wonder, are these women born with an incorrigible streak? Is this a psychological problem they have, or mental problem, or is it a lack of nurturing uh, when they're in their formative years? It sort of makes you wonder, because I know some of them had no remorse, like Amy Archer
yeah.
Gilligan in Connecticut, Jane Toppan in Massachusetts, and Lydia Sherman, and we can
Hmm.
go on and on. Sarah Robinson. I enjoyed reading about her case, which I had not known before I read your book, and there's a story and a half there. And they don't seem to have any regard for life. It's like that life is an obstacle and I'm going to eliminate it, or they do it for greed. They insure the life of that person, and then when they need money, they dispatch them and collect the insurance and keep on going
Like
because they either,
Lydia Sherman had 4 children with her first husband, and he was a police officer who was fired for they accused him of being a coward. He turned to drink, and
Mhm.
they had no money. Everything they had went to him drinking. So I think it was a matter of reaching a breaking point, and she decided to do away with the husband, and that'll solve the problems. And that didn't solve the problem, and she started killing her children. But what I also find interesting is that the doctors were called in, and they didn't automatically assume these people were poisoned. Um, I think her first husband was diagnosed with softness of the brain or something like that,
Yes,
and then the
yes,
Hmm.
yes.
the the next 2 children were gastric fever or something like that,
Hmm.
and then her
Hmm.
son her son was a house painter. He was diagnosed with painter's cholera. Um, she was only
What
caught
is
after
paint?
10 after
What
it
what
was I
is?
think it was like an industrial disease, like
Okay,
from painting too much, got in
okay.
his lungs. But he didn't really have it. He was poisoned.
What
Yeah,
was
it
he?
was
But she
What
wasn't.
did?
arsenic. Yeah,
What was the poison used?
it was arsenic.
I think it was arsenic. That was
Yeah,
the most
So,
yeah.
readily available.
so can we talk about arsenic?
Yes.
Let's clarify some of these poisons, because so
Great book.
so oh yeah,
Nice.
Shelley, you're into it.
Great book. Yeah.
I'm gonna
My
have to.
husband's a little nervous these days.
So they're saying like what it's like to die from arsenic, and I
Yes.
did a little research, and when the poisoning becomes acute, symptoms may include diarrhea, vomiting, blood in the urine, cramping, muscles, hair loss, stomach pain, convulsions. I mean that's pretty heavy. Like, but
Yeah.
that's in a larger dose. I think a lot of these women use very small doses over time. Am I correct?
I'm not sure. Well, arsenic you can take in small doses. In fact, women
Hmm.
would take it for complexion, to lighten their
Yes.
complexion. And there were
Hmm.
some men who believed it cured impotence. So they were called arsenic eaters.
Oh,
Hmm.
wow.
Um, and
It was a
sometimes that
thing.
was used. Sometimes that was used in the defense, saying, "Well, she didn't kill him. Her husband took this regularly. He must have just taken too much."
Yes, it was very popular. I know, studying the Gilded Age in Newport, they would have a pinch of arsenic in their tea to get that pallor. And being a powder and not terribly difficult to obtain, arsenic was all over the place in pesticides, fly strips. You could boil those fly strips and extract enough arsenic out of that. Um, and
Well,
given long term, it would leave deposits in your fingernails or hair, which was one way of, they actually took pieces of Abby and Andrew Borden's hair to check for any deposit like arsenic would leave.
Well, how
Um,
long does that last in your system, arsenic? Because I heard it was only like 24 hours or something that they could detect it in the system.
well, yeah, they didn't have a test till 1832, and maybe you can talk about the Marsh test. For the first time,
Right.
they could finally detect it.
So in the books in the Lizzie Borden case, I read that they had tested for poisoning, but if they didn't have a test, how could that even be then?
Well, they
And
did.
and if they tested the
1832.
milk, they tested the wrong milk because
Yes,
it was the day after or something that the
right,
wrong milk that they
right.
tested, right?
Well, yeah, Bridget admitted she drank off the milk from Tuesday. So, yeah, it wasn't the right milk. They tested the bread and they had stomach contents, they had hair samples, and of course, no prussic acid was procured. If you believe, and now we're getting into the Borden case, I mean, if you believe Eli Bentz, who was the drug dispenser at Smith's Pharmacy, who identified Lizzie by voice and sight as the woman on August 3rd who came in and tried to procure 10 cents worth of prussic acid, which was mostly used in some medicines, fairly controlled on the toxicity level of 1 to 6. Prussic acid and strychnine are at a 6, which is extremely toxic. Arsenic comes in at level 5. And he would not give her prussic acid without a doctor's prescription. But I believe Dr. Wood at Harvard Medical School did look for traces, and there was nothing pointing toward poisoning. Although getting back to arsenic, because boy, we could talk all night about arsenic.
and
Yeah.
I noticed on the intro, the picture of the medicine cabinet. There's a can of Rough on Rats,
Rough on
and that
rats.
was
Yeah.
a popular arsenic-based rat killer. And I've got at least 3 murders done that was identified as Rough on Rats was the
Do you
cause.
recall the names of those cases?
They weren't that famous. I
Are
could
they
look
in
it
your
up.
book
Uh,
or are they on your blog?
yeah, no, they're on the website on the blog.
Okay, great,
Murder
great.
by
Murder by-
Check
gaslight.
that out.
In
Yes.
fact, I did recently do a post on that. Compiling the 3 murders from Rough on Rats.
Yeah, so Robert has a blog. It's www. Too many W's. .murderbygaslight.com, and
Right, all one word.
all one word. And it's a great blog about 19th century murders. And if you subscribe to it, you'll get emails and news stories, and it's just amazing. And I love this artwork that you sent us.
Right.
This is like
Yes.
some of the coolest artwork.
It is, and you wouldn't think Victorian times would be so lurid, but Robert, looking through the is it the Daily Nightstick? Is your other
Yeah,
um,
it's
yeah, and it's come from
sort of a
what
takeoff on the Police Gazette.
Police Gazette, yeah.
Yeah,
And I mean, some of the illustrations are really shocking in their
right.
graphic nature. And I guess they were real popular in the 19th century. The
Yeah,
more sensational, the better.
that was a men's magazine. I mean, it was operational until the 1970s, but they would always have murders, and that's a lot of the source material for me. If I get a good picture, then I know that there's a story behind it, and I can
Yes.
find it.
Right, right. Well, before
So,
photography, you had to
But
have
also,
something. Yeah.
like Harper's Weekly and Frank Leslie illustrated newspaper, um, it was almost a staple that the murder stories, especially in New York and New England, uh, would sell newspapers.
Yeah, I remember seeing the cover of Leslie's. You mentioned Frank Leslie's,
Yeah,
and it was Lizzie at her trial holding a
yeah.
fan, sitting behind Governor Robinson, who was her lead attorney.
They
And
had good artists.
I was going to say that the newspaper and magazine artists were amazing. Quite often, Lizzie is depicted as really very manly and sort of wacky looking.
Hmm.
In real life, that wasn't true, but it helped support Juicy story and sold papers, apparently.
Right.
These amazing
So
drawings.
getting back to arsenic, arsenic was also in paint, green paint, which I discovered. So people would paint their houses and they were literally dying from the fumes of being in the house and absorbing it over time.
Yeah.
And the
And
most
arsenic in clothing, too, as well as
clothing,
dye in
women's
clothing. Yeah.
dresses, like the green Victorian dresses, they would literally die. I mean, it was amazing, like what arsenic was in. So there were other poisons too, like the phrase "cleanliness is next to godliness." Was first recorded in a sermon by an English cleric, John Wesley, in 1778, and basically it has to do with a household carbolic acid. Are you familiar with that? It was an item used as a cleaner and often stored with food, and the packages look similar to baking soda. And so a person could have accidentally poisoned themselves if they, accidentally took that. Cocaine is another thing that was used to offer relief for everything: sore throats, toothaches, and it was an instantaneous cure. And in 1887, the U.S. Surgeon General recommended that cocaine be used to treat depression. And that is so funny because up into Freudian times, I think even Freud was using cocaine on his patients, and eventually they found out that it was addictive, and it actually caused paranoia and delusions. And long-term use, the effects were really harmful. So cocaine they used for a long time, and also in 1898, Bayer sold heroin, which is a narcotic, and it was advertised as a cough suppressant. Can you imagine living back then? Everybody was drugged up on this stuff. They weren't getting
Yes.
better; they were getting
Yeah.
delusional. Like
I saw
And
one,
it
one
killed
bottle
people.
had heroin and cannabis and
yeah,
alcohol
Yeah.
in this cough
wow,
Lydia
syrup.
Pinkham's. Yeah, remember Lydia Pinkham's medicinal compound
Oh yeah,
for women? It was mostly alcohol with some other things in it,
yeah.
and there was belladonna and just all
Kimball,
sorts of things.
Kimball White Pine and Tar cough syrup, which was for colds, but the ingredients was chloroform, and it was deadly, causing cardiac arrest. Winslow's soothing syrup was morphine, and the ingredients included sodium carbonate, ammonia, and morphine. And it was advertised to help relieve children who were teething, but parents would give it to them and they would just die. Like it was so dangerous back then. And even Lysol disinfectant, even crazier in the 20th century. Lysol disinfectant was used as a douche and even birth control until the product, they found out that it contained this what's it, creosol or something, and caused inflammation and all this stuff. And I mean, could you imagine? I just like, and the only reason these things were taken off the market was from the U.S. government passed laws saying, nope,
Hmm.
you can't use it anymore. But this was up into the 20th century.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
Arsenic was very easy to get.
Yeah.
Some of the other ones
Inheritance
you had to.
powder. Yeah,
Some of them
I
you had
think it
to
was
use.
called.
The stronger poisons you had to sign a poison book. Uh,
At the pharmacy, or
At least in yeah, in the larger cities. I don't know about rural, but they kept track of that. But arsenic, not so much, because it was in a lot of over the counter products. And
And
there was one case.
often, go ahead.
I had one case where the guy's girlfriend got pregnant, and someone told him rough on rats would end the pregnancy, and it ended the pregnancy, but it also killed her,
wow.
Kill the mother. Yeah.
killed the mother.
And to
Yeah.
think, like, you wrote a book about this. I've included many women, murderous women that use poison, and I mean, think about all the murders that have happened, and many that were even undetected, back then. And I think, like, once, like, men discovered that women could use poison, it sort of became fearful too of women. I would think,
Yeah.
right?
Gave them a power. Well, let me ask you, Robert, why do you think women and poisoners, why was it the weapon of choice for a woman? Goes all the way back to Lucretia Borgia,
Well, I think it's because you can do it without being detected. It's not violent. They're not going to turn on you until it's too late. And I would say there were probably a lot of cases where the women got away with it, because most of the big cases were multiple poisoners, and it's like Lydia Sherman had to kill 10 people before anyone noticed, or anyone took a close look. Then they started digging up the bodies and found the poison.
So, and you wonder how the women themselves discovered, like how to manage the poison, like what dosage to use, because these serial killers that you're studying, Shelley, they're serial killers, and they've killed like
many victims. Yeah.
many victims.
Well, one of our viewers just, I think it might have been Doug, maybe, mentioned
Hey,
arsenic
Doug.
and old lace.
Yeah.
Yeah, arsenic and old lace, which Connecticut, Windsor, Connecticut, which is maybe 30 minutes from where I'm sitting. Amy Archer Gilligan had a nursing home, and her method of paying her bills was to have her patients sign a lifetime, for a certain amount of money, care for meals and boarding.
Wasn't
Um,
there like
and
60
then,
deaths that occurred in the Archer home between 1907 and 1917? 60
yeah,
deaths.
yeah,
48.
yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Wow. I mean, the,
Yeah.
the statistics are just crazy. And in a five
Well,
year period, 48 more people died between 1911 and 1916. So,
it's the basis for arsenic and old lace, and as you see, oh, here's Joanne chiming in. Yeah, that play in the movie was supposedly based on Amy Archer, and it was. They finally caught her when the local newspaper man who wrote the obits for Windsor noticed a lot of these people that he was writing about died at the Archer nursing home.
mm,
And they started looking into that. He got the editor of the Hartford Courant newspaper, which is still in publication, to undertake an investigation. Sister Amy, as she was called, we don't know if she killed Mr. But she did
That,
kill her
that's
second
a, that's a,
husband.
that's another
Yeah,
case of the doctors and the coroners not even assuming that it's poison. They said it's natural
keep
causes
it in.
for all those people that she killed until it
That's
finally
right.
came
It
out.
was, yeah, Dr. King would sign the death certificate, and he would put down gastric enteritis or something like that. And
Hmm.
there was a wonderful article called The Hearse Comes at Midnight, and Dr. King would drive his hearse around the back. The house is still there on Prospect Street in Windsor.
you've
I've
been
been by it many times. And one day the door was open. I actually peeked in the hallway and saw the staircase that went upstairs. And I pictured Amy, who was a very petite woman, taking her lemonade. That was a vehicle. She would put arsenic, and a couple of times she used strychnine. Strychnine's a little dangerous to use because of the convulsions. and the spasms. It's a very violent acting poison, and it's fairly easy to diagnose. As I mentioned, my grandfather had a dog one time that got hold of some meat that had been poisoned for rats with strychnine, and I saw what it did to the dog. There's an arching of the back. It's very violent and terrifying, and fairly easy to diagnose. Whereas arsenic, is more of a quiet death, and they just get weaker and weaker from a lot of vomiting, and it attacks the arsenic. Let's see, strychnine attacks the central nervous system. Arsenic is mostly what is that?
Yeah.
Gastrointestinal,
Mm-hmm.
and then prussic acid, which we hadn't talked about. You die actually of chemical asphyxia. It attacks the respiratory, the red blood cells' ability to, grab hold of oxygen
And that's why
and
I think
suffocate.
it was crazy for Lizzie Borden to even try to acquire prussic acid, because even handling it, if you get it on you, I think you could kill yourself just by handling it or something. It was so potent, right?
Very dangerous
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah. You know, it's always diluted in something else.
Right.
And so when she had asked for 10 cents worth of prussic acid, I'm thinking, well, it would have been suspended in water, a certain percent, and why would you want to put that on your fur coat to kill a moth? I mean, it was used in
No.
pesticides, but I mean, you'd just be getting the furs wet because it would be a liquid.
Yeah.
And none of that story made a whole lot of sense, did it?
No. So Amy Archer, right? She was sentenced to death, but then it was appealed, and she pleaded insanity, or her lawyer
Yes.
did, and then
Yeah.
she was sentenced to life in prison, and they transferred her, ironically, to an insane asylum,
Well,
which
yeah,
she spent her life.
Probably where she belonged.
Right. Let me ask you a question, Robert. Now, do you have murders men in your stories too? Like, were they poisoners, or did you find a big difference between men and women murderers?
Um, yeah, men didn't use poison as often, but there were some male poisoners. There's one in upstate New York, Henry Green. He this would probably be 1830s, and he he married an actress, brought her home and his mother didn't like her. Wouldn't even come out to meet her, but they ran off and eloped. And a week later, he poisoned her. And no one can really figure out exactly why, except that his mother didn't like her. And that was another case. The doctor did not diagnose poison, but Henry wouldn't let anyone else give her the medicine, and he would add poison to the medicine. And after her death, they finally figured it out and hanged him. But there were I'm trying to think, other male poisoners. It was considered cowardly for a man to poison a woman.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought
So,
of that.
so Dr. Bowen, right, in the Lizzie Borden case, he gave Lizzie bromocaffeine to help calm her nerves at first. And I looked into this drug. Now, this drug has an interesting history. In an article by the Keesby and Madison Company, The Secret of a Clear Head, bromocaffeine was described as a remedy used for the relief of headaches, backaches, hysteria, mental fatigue, physical exhaustion. But in addition, it was used to calm nerves, nervous excitability, restlessness of the insane patient. They used it a lot in insane asylums. And what happened was early formulas had, it's called, I have trouble with these words, azacinamide. It's an ingredient which is no longer used today due to its toxicity. And it was withdrawn from the U.S. market in 1975. And that's interesting. Like, it had this poison in it, bromocaffeine, and they were giving this to people in insane asylums, and Lizzie Borden, her own doctor, gave it to him. So are you familiar at all, like, with Shelley? Did you kind of know that, or that bromocaffeine was was toxic, which I
Uh,
found amazing.
I wasn't aware of the level of toxicity. I had known that it was a common go to for nervousness and agitation to calm people down. You wouldn't think with the word caffeine in there, you'd think that would rev somebody up, but yeah, I
Right.
didn't know it had
Yeah.
toxic properties.
And also, the morphine dosage that Dr. Bowen gave Lizzie Borden was an eighth of a gram, and then later he doubled that dosage. So, the Mayo Clinic cites that morphine dosage amounts given for pain, an average dose for moderate pain is 10 to 20 milligrams every 4 hours. That's a hell of a lot more than what Lizzie was getting. So it makes you
Yeah.
wonder if she was goofy in her inquest testimony or if that was just a fake ploy to get around trying to figure out her story. Thoughts on that?
I didn't think her inquest, which is the only time we hear her speaking, is her inquest. I didn't think it was goofy. I think she was quite shrewd. My favorite line is when the attorney asked her, "Were you friendly with your stepmother? Were your relations cordial?" And she says, "Well, that all depends on your idea of cordiality." Now, that was a snappy comeback. Somebody whose brain was addled and over medicated. I found her actually quite sharp. She got
I never
Yeah.
read
confused a
it.
few times. Yeah.
I never read it, but I heard that there were contradictions in her testimony.
Yes, that's right.
What were they?
Well, I think she was trying to figure, I think she was trying to place herself in strategic places in the house, everywhere
Hmm.
where she could not be seen. Like if
Exactly.
Bridget was looking in the window, she placed herself in the kitchen. And you if you weren't in the living room, you wouldn't be able to see Lizzie if she was in the kitchen. Things like that. I don't know, Shelley, help me here.
Yeah, well, I think she tweaked it a bit when I think Lizzie was very fast on her feet, actually. And when she saw, oh, I better fine tune that. The biggest example that stands out in my mind, they ask her, "Where were you when your father came home?" And on the day of the murders, and I love to read witness statements because they're taken immediately,
Yes.
and usually they're more reliable when the trial comes around 10 months later. I don't find them quite as credible as what was taken immediately. And Lizzie said, or Bridget said, "I heard Lizzie laugh at the top of the stairs as I was opening the front door to let Mr. Borden in." I said a little, I don't know what she said, something maybe a little vulgar. I guess we'll never know. And she said, "I heard Lizzie laughing at me when she heard me." And then Mr. Borden came in. Well, now we jump up in time where we're at the trial, and all of a sudden, or actually at the inquest, Lizzie said, "At first I said, yeah, I thought I was upstairs. And no, I was actually in the kitchen when my father came home." And the attorney gets very testy with her. He says, "How will you have it, Miss Borden? Were you upstairs or were you downstairs?" And he got very firm with her and put her under a microscope. "Where were you? You know, give us a final answer here. You're all over the map here." And then other reasons why she went to the barn. "Ah, I was going to get a piece of tin to mend a screen." And that sort of changed. I think sometimes she forgot who she told what. I know Hercule Poirot, Agatha Christie's famous detective, said the way to catch a killer is keep them talking. The more they talk and the more they try to embellish, the tighter the noose comes around their neck because
It
they
totally
give
makes
themselves
sense. Yeah.
away. Yeah, just, keep it simple, say one thing and then shut up. But you keep them talking and they forget what they told, what did I tell Mrs. Churchill? Wait, what did I tell so and so? And I think she was quickly thinking on her feet. The one time she's actually giving testimony live, and that's the inquest. And, the other story was I was in the barn a half an hour, and that turned into 20 minutes, and that turned into maybe 15 minutes because other aspects weren't gelling with her timeline, and she was seeing, let me tweak that a little bit. And so then it was fishing sinkers to make sinkers for metal, and to make sinkers for her fishing trip on Monday. But wait a minute, what about the tin to fix the window? And so you're right, Robert. She's always tweaking and talking too much. Get a story and stick to it, and then be
Hmm.
quiet. And they kept her quiet because she never got on the stand and talked anymore after
Right.
that. I
Right,
think her
right.
lawyers knew,
Oh, very smart.
just keep her in the stand.
It's
Yeah.
usually a bad idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I think after that, the lawyers presented her in a different way. They had their own idea of
Mhm.
how they were going to present her as this well-groomed Victorian lady. And,
Mhm.
they were like what did you call it, Shelley? Not the knights in shining armor, but they were like
Oh,
the
her
mass.
champions. Her
Yes,
champions.
yes,
Yes.
exactly. And that's, in a lot
Hmm.
of ways how I saw Victorian women back at that time. And in a lot of the women in my book that I studied, like and Shelley, you and I were talking about this too. Like one, for example, Marie Lafarge, when she was married, her parents, it was an arranged marriage at age 23, and she wanted to get out of it. And, she begged her husband to let her out of it, and he refused. So, yada, 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 traces of arsenic were found in his food. And basically, she was tried for the murder of her husband. He got really ill and he died. And they actually had evidence against her that she did poison him. But the thing about her, she became a very harsh critic of women's positions in society. And she wrote about women keeping silent, not being able to express their feelings. One quote from, like, there's lots of memoirs from her. I love her writing style, but and the writing back then was really interesting too, because that's all they had to do, right? There was no TV, so they wrote very eloquent. And she goes, "At last, my mind revolted instead of submitting, and under the yoke, I learned better to appreciate the value and to cherish more deeply the love of liberty." So she would write these things. She wrote about her marriage when she was in prison, and she said, and I quote, "I allowed myself to be married in a daze, but when I came down to earth, I was revolted. I had abandoned my own dowry, my will, my life itself, to one who had married me in order to restore his business with his fortune, adorn his parlor with my person, and complete his life with my poor life. But I announced I would only give my love if I were loved in return, and the reward I received for my candor, death, dishonor, and perpetual agony." Wow. So I
That's
read
rough.
this, and I think of these women, and even Lizzie, she was very unhappy in her situation. And I often thought about, what if she did write some letters out of out of jail, when she was in jail, saying they should take me up to the sane asylum because she was so miserable. But I look at these murderous women from not that I have any sympathy for them because they did murder, but just their perspective of why they did it. And back then, it was a real harsh reality for many women. And you were talking about having babies and killing their own babies because there was no such thing as a single mother back then.
Hmm.
And Shelley, you were talking about, right now you're reading up on and studying postpartum depression.
Yes.
The after effects of having children, when these women were popping out babies, like, how could they have any sanity? Like, I mean.
Well, one case in particular everybody's familiar with is the case of the wife of Lodwick Borden,
Mm.
Lizzie's great uncle Lodwick, who lived in the house right next door. And his second wife, he would have four, and they would die. Hopefully natural causes, but his second wife, Eliza Ann, had three children in rapid succession. Um, and she tried to drown three of them in the cistern in the basement of the house next door to the Borden's home. And she committed suicide after she had thrown the children in with the husband's straight razor. And I thought, what an extraordinary thing, until I started looking into these unhappy women who, there was no treatment for this because doctors hadn't even diagnosed postpartum issues, and it was called melancholia. And the treatment for that, maybe they send you to an asylum or a sanitarium. It's a nicer
Hmm.
word for it.
You'd probably never come
Uh,
home.
oh,
Once you
Well,
go
yeah,
to one of
yeah,
those, you
that was
but
it,
it
right?
was
You probably.
common. Yeah, it was very common. And I'm finding more and more cases. I found another one last week, not even looking for it, where the mother couldn't go on anymore. She felt like she was a burden to her husband, but she couldn't go to heaven without her dear children. So she would kill the children and then kill herself. And it was far more common than I ever knew. That sort of thing went on well into the turn of the century. The last case I worked on was 1906, and I'm sure there were some instances even after that. And they weren't poisoned. Quite often, women would drown them like kittens.
hmm.
The children weren't poisoned. So this is a little bit different than like the Mary Ann Cotton thing or Lydia Sherman. Um,
There was
and then you have,
one story
yeah,
I
sorry.
read. I can't remember the names involved, but the mother went a little bit crazy, and she believed that there were murderers coming into the house, and the only thing they could do was take poison and die themselves. And the husband stopped her, but then he left, and she still had the poison. She held a gun to her daughter's head and made her drink the poison, and then she drank
Yeah.
it, and they both died.
Oh
But it
wow.
was it was it was obviously she was insane. I don't
Mhm.
know what the
Well,
diagnosis would be,
insane.
but
Yeah, yeah. Insanity, desperation. But I've run across a couple of lady poisoners who seem to enjoy what they did. And two of those would be Jane Topin and Amy Archer Gilligan. And they're both in the nursing profession. Jane Topin, very, very famous Massachusetts case. Um, she was actually in the asylum up the street, from the jail, the Taunton jail where
Yeah,
Lizzie was
didn't everyone
incarcerated.
love her? Everyone loved her, right?
Oh, Jolly
Yeah,
Jane, Jolly Jane.
yeah.
She was born Honora Kelly, and had a very checkered childhood, abandoned, abused, passed around, and but I notice in the nursing medical sometimes I think they call them angels of mercy, and these are women
mhm.
that enjoy poisoning. Jane Topin was actually excited.
That's number 9,
And
Kenny.
yeah, Jane Topin really got a thrill of a sexual nature. She would crawl in the bed next to her victim after she had poisoned them and watched their breathing, their last breath. That's Jolly Jane right there.
Mm-hmm.
But she was so charming. They began to smell a rat. I think she was in Cambridge, outside of Boston, at a hospital there, and the staff got a little bit suspicious. Too many of Jane's patients weren't making it. But rather than investigating, she was passed on to another establishment and got away with it for the longest darn time.
Do you know how
But
many murders she did, or?
it's unknown, but
Yeah.
it's considerable. And even when she was adopted, she poisoned. I guess it was her adoptive sister. Um, Took her on a lovely vacation by the seaside, and they were having a wonderful time. And the pleasure, I find this absolutely chilling. That, and you could say, well, clearly this woman was insane. Uh, but I find that even more horrifying than some of the desperate women that kill from need, or violence has occurred to them, and they sort of have to do this to survive. uh, and these people that plot and scheme, like Jane and Amy Archer, either for financial gain in the case of Amy Archer Gilligan, or just pure sheer pleasure in the power of life and death she held in her hand, absolutely mind blowing. You can't imagine someone so evil and conniving, which brings up one little point before I forget and my train leaves that station. Uh, if Lizzie really did try to get prussic acid the day before the murder, to my mind, that's even more horrifying when the murder is premeditated. And with the case of poisoning and poisoners, it's so often, it's so cold. Like
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Neil Cream, very famous case, new book just out on him. His method of killing was strychnine. But he would seduce young women, get them back, like because he was a doctor, they trusted him. Like Jane Topin was a nurse, and people trusted her, because you wouldn't think medical people would, be interested in killing you rather
Yeah.
than curing
I
you.
think I'm back.
Yeah, okay,
Oh,
welcome
there you
back.
are. Yeah.
So I want to get
Yeah.
Wasn't letting me
to Mary Ann Cotton, because she was known as the Black Widow, and in 1973 she was hung for murder. She was 40 years old, but she was known to have killed at least 21 people, 11 of her 13 children, 3 of her 4 husbands, and her mother. Like, that alone just blew my mind. That she had 4 husbands and she killed 11 of her 13 children. Wow.
She's a famous one for sure.
So
And,
yeah. So a lot of
Sometimes they did think they thought they were doing the children a favor by killing them because the household was too poor. I mean, it wouldn't be this case, but like Lydia Sherman.
Lydia Sherman. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
slide number
one less mouse
6.
to feed.
exactly.
So tell us about
Removing
Lydia
an
Sherman, because
obstacle.
I'm not familiar with her.
She, I think I talked about this earlier. Her husband couldn't support the family and did nothing but drink, and so she finally poisoned him. And then they still were in trouble, so she poisoned the 2 daughters, and then the son. And then she moved to Connecticut and married again. Killed her second husband, his children. She was married 3 times. Ended up
Yeah.
10 victims.
Wow.
Yeah, 10 or 11.
But
So-
Well, that was Danbury, Connecticut. Danbury.
So I have on my
Lydia.
list too, Bella Guinness, is it? Number 5, Kenny.
Oh,
Tell-
Bill Gunnis. Yeah.
Bella Guinness, right.
yeah,
Talk
Robert
about
knows all
her.
about that one. Yeah.
well, that's just barely into the 20th century, so I didn't do her.
Oh, you didn't do Bill.
No,
Did you, Shelley?
I haven't done that much about her, but I know there was a poem written, and she's quite famous. The same sort of,
it's a good
scenario.
book by Harold Schechter about her.
Okay, so
That's
we'll
one
have, to,
for-
we'll have to look her up. And let's see. So Amy Gilligan, Lydia Sherman, Sarah Robinson.
Yeah, Sarah Jane
number
Robinson,
7.
Cambridge. She also killed her family, thinking that she was helping them. And,
Was that about
I
insurance
think just-
money, Robert? Yeah,
It was. That's how they finally
insurance
caught her.
money.
It wasn't
Yeah.
it wasn't the doctor. It was the insurance coming
Mm-hmm.
to the same household again and again. And that
I
was
think
in,
she
You're
was.
right,
Massachusetts.
David.
Yeah, wasn't she called the Massachusetts Borgia in the newspaper?
she was.
I think. Yeah. Oh, there she is. Wow, she looks pretty grim.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of these, they're not photos, they're drawings, right? Or well, some of them are photos.
The middle one's a photo.
Okay, right, but the other ones are drawings.
Yeah.
I think the artists back then were amazing, like to portray,
Well, they were.
like
Well,
to
let's see,
get it right,
Sarah.
you know.
Yeah. Sarah Robinson, that would be in the 80s, wasn't it? Like 1881 through 86?
Yeah, I think that's right.
The mid to late 80s for her crime spree.
Okay, and
Yeah,
then
like the murderers.
so let's see, I'm
Looking at my notes here.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring up one that I have in my book. It is, get it right. Okay, so it's a story of Ellen Dunn, and she was in Fall River, Massachusetts. I had one reader when she read this chapter, and she said, "I can't do anymore, Kim. I just can't. It's too gruesome." And she stopped there and respectfully, okay, but it's the truth, and I'm not going to sugarcoat something that actually happened. But this poor woman, and it was a gruesome story. So she had children ages 12, 7, 5, 3, and a 6-month-old son named Dennis P. Dunn. And basically, I love the name of this street. They lived in 6.5 Street in Fall River. How they ever got the half, I don't know, but it was 6.5 Street. So basically, I think Mrs. Dunn was an alcoholic because she drank a lot, and I think she suffered from that. And I think she had it because times were rough back then, and her husband was traveling away to send money back to be able to support that large family. So she was left alone, fending for herself, and she had the older boy, Michael, to help her out, but she would send him out to get her alcohol, and he would come back and she would drink a bottle in a day. So the story goes, basically, she held her 6-month-old baby out the second-story window and just threw him out the window to hit the pavement, and he died a miserable death. And she beat on her children also. She was taken to court, and ironically, she was tried by the same judge that was on the Lizzie Borden case, and he let her go. The verdict was they're not satisfied that she was of sound mind when the act of killing was done. So to be legally accountable and whether she is now insane, they let her go. So the decision of the court, and now the defendant is brought in, set at the bar, and after due consideration, it is ordered by the court that the said Ellen Dunn be discharged and go without delay. So they let her off knowing, like, there were 200, 300 spectators, seeing her beat her children and throwing her 6-month-old son out the window, and they let her go. Now, explain that. Like, is it
And
a
I know they
male?
didn't like to hang. They didn't like to hang women, and there was always a big protest. Even in the terrible cases, they would say, "Oh, we can't do this."
Right. So
So that's part of it.
when in time did that change? When did it change that the rules changed that allowed women to be put to death?
They were always allowed, but the juries and judges tended to be lenient. But there were cases. Roxalana Drews killed her husband and cut him into pieces and burned him in the furnace, and she was hung. But there
What?
was
Ooh,
protest.
that
This
was
was in
nasty.
the yeah. Um,
Well, do you think that's because juries used to be all male? It was a very
yeah.
long time
Oh,
before we
good
had women
point.
on a jury.
So there was,
Right.
And yeah,
but the women's rights groups would also protest that they're not tried by a jury of their peers, and but the men would tend to be sympathetic, and
I've often wondered what would have happened if there had been women on Lizzie Borden's jury and not men who had daughters Lizzie's age who couldn't
mhm.
imagine their daughter could do such a thing, and therefore Lizzie probably couldn't. You think they were just sort of being gallant and gentlemanly and being her champion, protecting her, or
Yes, I
there was
think
just, yeah.
there
Well,
was
you're familiar.
one case I wanted to mention about. She was a poisoner, but sort of a different side to the whole thing. She was married at 16. Minnie Wallace Walkup. She married
Mm.
she was from Louisiana, from New Orleans. Married a man about 3 times her age. He took her back to Emporia, Kansas, and a month later he was dead from arsenic. And
David, you're
the,
right. Go
the
ahead.
jury uh, they the jury let her off. They acquitted her, and I mean, the circumstantial evidence was really strong against her, but no direct evidence. But one jury said, um, I couldn't live with myself if I had to put that little girl to death.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly.
Mm.
And 12 years
Yeah.
later, she married again, the same circumstances, killed the husband, and he got off then as well.
Yeah, and I understand there was some hesitancy, especially if the woman was of childbearing age, that perhaps, if she were executed, hanged,
Mm.
or however, she might possibly be pregnant, and it was a risk. That came
I
out of the
heard that.
Bathsheba Spooner case,
Hmm.
which was 19th century, but much earlier than Lizzie. And the woman actually was pregnant. She told them, that she was, and she was executed anyway. And they found out later she was pregnant. So maybe that might be one other reason that all male juries were sort of more protective about not executing women
Hmm.
even if they thought they were guilty. They seemed to get life sentences, institutes for criminally insane. And that's what happened to Amy Archer Gilligan. She didn't like working in prison laundry, and I think she feigned insanity. She would sit in a chair and rock and not talk and just read her Bible and act, off her bean. And so that way she got transferred to a more genteel environment and didn't have to do the laundry anymore. Uh, but it's interesting how their skirts did help them. Their
Well,
petticoats
Yeah.
did protect them a little
yeah,
bit.
and I don't think men didn't know. Like they had no clue what was going on with women back then. Even in
Do they now?
well,
Yeah.
that's the thing. How much has changed? Like in the trial of Lizzie Borden, there was this whole thing with the menstruation and finding the pail of bloody rags in the basement, and the lawyers on both sides didn't even want to go there and touch that at all. They
Yeah,
skirted
yeah.
through that whole thing because you just didn't talk about that. So, the first trial that ever mentioned like a woman got off for being insanity. Like the case was tried for her being insane. I think it was like in the 1860s. There was this doctor though, Charles Knowlton. He was an American doctor and philosopher, and he wrote this book called The Fruits of Philosophy, which was published in Massachusetts in 1832. And it was at a time when the United States laws prohibited the publishing of immoral and obscene material, but it included information about contraceptives for women. So he would share this pamphlet with women that came into his office, and he actually got arrested for that, and he was fined $50, which back then was a lot of money, and he was found guilty and served jail time for 3 months of hard labor. That's crazy, like for a
Yeah.
doctor to help women and then to be put in jail for it. And it just shows like the type of society, even men, had to watch what they were doing around that time period.
Yeah, there was another case in Boston. I can't remember the name, but husband and wife had a free love newspaper, and they would send out pamphlets about birth control and
Mm-hmm.
hygiene, and they caught on a sting. It was I can't remember any names, but the postmaster was also uh, anti anti-sex, let's say, and they bought the pamphlets and had them sent to New Jersey. So now it becomes a federal postal crime. They came and arrested him and put him in jail.
Wow.
We just had an interesting question. Do you think
That was in
Robert?
the probably 1880s.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay.
do, do you think we'd be so interested in
What
Lizzie
was it?
if the jury had found her guilty? One of our viewers just
No.
asked me. Okay, she would have just gone to jail and we
Um,
wouldn't have heard any more about her.
or executed, whatever. But uh, there are other cases that were as big at the time, but if they had if say the perpetrator was executed, that's the end of it. All the mystery goes
Mhm.
away.
Was Jack the
We
Ripper
did we
around
did
that
the
time?
job.
Was Jack the
Yeah.
Ripper?
1880s, yeah.
Yeah. So because
That
that
was
was a
London, yeah.
that was a really big case.
Right, because he was never
but they
caught.
never caught
And
anybody.
yeah, the Ripper is a mystery. People want a
So that's
mystery.
another case. If they had caught him, it would
Yeah,
be over.
it'd be over. If
Exactly.
Lizzie had been
But then they
hanged,
also want to say, "Oh, I've solved it."
yeah, no bed and breakfast, no Lizzie
Yeah,
bobbleheads, and we
the
wouldn't be
mystery goes
sitting
away.
here. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to look for this thing that I have where they reasons to put women away in an asylum. Um, and I'm trying to find it. I can't find it. Um, let's see.
Well, it didn't take much. I think you could have like a husband and maybe a doctor uh, put you. They could put you away. There was a famous novel. I think it was a was it called The Yellow Room, where this doctor signed for her husband, and this woman was put in a room in seclusion and literally peeled the wallpaper
Oh, the
off the
yellow
wall.
wallpaper.
The
I've read
yellow
that. Yeah,
wallpaper. Yeah, and this woman was not insane, but she became
she went
crazy.
insane.
Yeah, from being incarcerated thanks to her husband who wanted to get rid of her and the doctor who
Hmm.
went along with it. Yeah, yeah. So
So
you were
I
at the mercy of your spouse.
Yeah.
I often thought that Lizzie had some kind of mental incapacity, like some kind of mental thing going on, possibly bipolar. Because if you look at the comments during her childhood, and even with her mother Sarah, they always said in the family that these women were peculiar, and peculiar is a very like funny word. I guess they used it. You could say strange or out of the norm, or they
Odd.
acted odd, not not like they were supposed to act, and that followed her throughout her life. So I always thought that she had this underlying mental illness going on that she was hiding, and her family was hiding from the public because they were a well-known Borden family. And of course, you don't want that. But there's a small part
Well,
of
weren't
me.
they both the sisters fairly old to be unmarried?
Yes, yeah, they were both spinsters. Yeah, they
So
never
that would
married.
be peculiar.
Well, it is peculiar, but Lizzie's cousin Carrie, the one she went on the trip with over to Europe, wasn't married either, and she
Hmm.
was, like these well-to-do or well-off women. A lot of them never married because they didn't need to, because they knew that all their things would go to their husbands, and they David, I
I
love
just
these
saw
comments
David.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, because they knew that, maybe they would be taken away to an insane asylum. And that was
Hmm.
the thing that really bugged me about the Lizzie case. Like, even the day of the murder, or the day before the murders, when John Morris came and Andrew wanted to get a hold of Emma to say that something, if you can't get a hold of me, he said something weird, like if you can't get a hold of me or something, like it was something having to do with, he thought something was going to happen. So I don't know if people say, oh, he was making a new will, and he was doing this, but is it possible that maybe they were thinking about putting Lizzie in an asylum because she was just like, so, like, a lot of people that visited, said that she would stay up in her room and she would sulk. And I don't know, Shelley, what do you think? Is there some little part of me that says that she could have been put away if the real truth came out about her?
Yeah, we just had a question from Renee
Sure.
who asked if Lizzie had ever had seizures.
Mm.
Victoria Lincoln wrote a book called Lizzie Borden by Daylight, a Lizzie Borden by Daylight, A Private Disgrace.
Right.
Excellent book. Her theory is excellent, and it gives you a lot of background on the time in history and visuals. You can almost smell the horse manure in the street. She's a really good descriptive writer. And she had a theory that Lizzie had temporal lobe epilepsy, had like a fugue state, had had a seizure, had killed Mrs. Borden, completely blocked that out and was perfectly normal in that interval between the two murders, and then had another seizure, murdered the father without knowing what she was doing, and then was perfectly fine after that. I find that a big stretch of the imagination.
Was there any evidence that she?
No, there's
Any,
Well,
not
and I don't
evidence.
any
think
history?
epilepsy like affects you like that, does it? I don't think so.
No, but that was
Yeah.
her theory.
Yeah.
I won't say that maybe there was some issue with Lizzie. Might have had what today they would call anger management, how to deal with negative things without going ballistic, or perhaps bipolarism. I know when she was a child, she had a head injury. She had a bad fall. And of course, you must read Parallel Lives, which is published by the Fall River Historical Society. And it
Nice long
uses
book.
yeah, well, yeah, you'd get a
Yeah.
bruise reading that in bed. So it's
Keep the
6
door
pounds.
open.
It's just over
Yeah, it's
6
hard
pounds.
to
I
hold
had to
too,
put
right?
a pillow under it.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 volumes, guys. Next time, you give us 2 volumes. But one of her little friends said she went to see Lizzie after this injury, and Lizzie was so nasty and so mean to her. She says, I'm not going back to see her. I'm not going to go back up there. She was so rude and so miserable. And then, of course, her principal, Mr. Benson, gave a little interview about Lizzie as a student when she was at the Morgan Street School, which is still standing but is due for demolition any minute, sadly.
Yeah, it's a
And
shame.
he said she was kind of a loner. She was very much under the influence of her older sister, Emma. She always thought that people judged her poorly, that she didn't make a good impression. There was a insecurity problem, and wasn't always in good temper. So there's a lot of little things, and for a young person, that's kind of sad that she would be such a troubled child. And so who knows if maybe there was something that treatment could have corrected, or medication, if they had it, might have corrected. I wouldn't rule it out for sure.
Yeah, and I wouldn't buy into the oh poor Lizzie thing either, because she kept company with quite a few women that were very
Well to do.
well
Yeah.
to do. In fact, one was just on my website about Grace Grace
Grace Hartley Howell.
Howell,
Her
right,
cousin.
right. But she was married. Wasn't she married to Roosevelt?
No, she was married to Roosevelt's right-hand man, Louis B. Howell.
Okay, I knew it was some
And
connection there.
yeah,
Okay,
and she was also Fall River's first postmaster, and very
right,
highly connected,
right.
in Washington D.C. And I think probably Lizzie had the Episcopal minister at her funeral, because the Howells, Grace Hartley Howell was a big uh, mover and shaker in the Episcopal Church, Ascension,
Right.
which
So
is now
think,
Church of the Holy Spirit on Rock Street.
yeah. So think of these women that she kept company with, and they were all for women's suffrage movement and women's rights, and they campaigned and they belonged to clubs for that, and Lizzie belonged to clubs too, although she never stayed long in any one of them. That was the
She
other thing.
volunteered. It's
Right.
not that we don't know that she was invited, but her way of entree into the upper crust, from the hill section, the wealthier end of the Borden
Mm-hmm.
family, volunteered a lot. And that's how, if you were not, you know, in with the in crowd, so to speak, if you volunteered, people really would allow you to be as helpful as you wanted to be. That way, you got included in a lot of things. So
Right.
Lizzie didn't really get religion until she was about 25, and that
Wow.
was she did have a job, and time was heavy on her hands. You can only embroider slippers so much and iron your hankies, and you have to have some kind of meaningful way to pass the day.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think she really
so
tried to fit in, and maybe within herself, she thought she was kind of like it was a struggle for her to fit into this society, because she wasn't like a lot of those women, although she read, and you and I had this discussion too, a lot. So I think she was very intelligent and insightful of what was going on around her, and which
Yeah.
is motive for
Well,
wanting.
and she had a taste of a bigger horizon
Right.
when she went to Europe in 1890 with some of the well-to-do ladies, including Anna Borden
Yes.
and was it Caroline? I think. Yeah, and
Carrie.
so they
Carrie.
Carrie,
Yeah.
that's right, Carrie Borden and Anna, and also Miss Brayton, and and Ellen Shove, whose father Charles Shove was also, a mill owner, and she kind of got a taste of what money could buy, that there was a world beyond Fall River, and it gave her ideas. I think it would
Oh,
give me
definitely.
ideas.
Oh, definitely. I think that was a catalyst, like coming back from that, because that was only a few months before the murders, and coupled with all the other things, because and a lot of people feel this way. It wasn't just one thing; it was many things that built up
Yeah.
to a premeditated state, which she blurted out to Alice Russell the night before, trying to come up with all these reasons, for something happening in the house, which it did the next day. So, yeah, that is so intriguing to me. Like
And the
the
break-in, of
psychological
course.
profile.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
break-in in the house the year before the murder,
right.
1891, and only Abby Borden's things were taken. Um, that makes you give some thought to. She comes back from Europe, then there's this break in, and then in the short time before the murders, that would be this time
Hmm.
in history, this week and last week, um, there was some tension in the Borden home, and Emma and Lizzie decided to go on a little jaunt. Get out of Dodge, get away from Abby, get away from the city, the heat, and crammed in that little environment in the house on Second Street,
Yeah.
and got a
So
little break from each other.
yeah. So I want to show some of these poison bottles back in the 1800s. Some of the bottles I think are really pretty.
I
I
thought
mean,
so
like,
too.
okay, so we're going, Kenny, we're going number one, two, and three, these slides, just to give you an idea of what the bottles looked like back then. And um, I just think they're like cute.
No, I like
Like,
to collect them.
but,
Yeah.
but I mean, arsenic had arsenic on it. So slide two is the prussic acid.
Which was
Um,
actually hydrocyanic acid. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And then
And
this,
Merck is still around. Merck Pharmaceuticals still around.
oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
With
And
the
then,
skull and
and then we have
crossbones.
the third one, which is the cyanide. What is Paris green?
That's that pigment that uses arsenic to get that rich green color in paint.
Oh, and that
Mm.
has arsenic in
Yeah,
it then?
Paris green. Yes,
And I
that
have
gives you the green color.
I have seen that used, Paris green. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was a poison.
Mhm. And in
So,
dyes as well.
okay, and then we are going to show it's number 14, Kenny. So, this is something new in the Lizzie Borden shop. I might as well bring this up. My friend, Patty Kelly, does stained glass, and she made us a poison bottle. So,
Hmm.
it's like this blue, and you can see like sort of the liquid in it. It's separated, and then she drops the green drop, which is the poison inside of
Oh,
it.
it must be arsenic. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think it
and
must
it's
be
like
arsenic.
5 inch by 5 inch. I thought it was so cute. It looks huge in this picture, but it's actually kind of small and delicate and cute. So if you like stained glass, it's in the Lizzie Borden shop. Uh, and the other one is the next one, Kenny, 15. At the end of this, we're going to give out, we're doing a raffle for, these are trading cards that we put in the shop. Each one on the back has like a story of, like the burning dress is our latest one. I love it because it has the design. The artist tried to put the design of the Bedford cord in it, and then the
Oh
fire.
yes.
And then
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the monogram, the letter L, she cleverly put a little pear behind it. It's so cute. So these are some of the artists that are just so brilliant. The Black Cat myth we recently did. Carrie, all these artists I just love. It's a myth about the black cat or the cat in the Lizzie Borden story, where it was said that she tried to decapitate or chloroform a cat, which I don't believe she did. It's just a tale that went around. However, Shelley told me yesterday that Lizzie actually owned a cat named Blackie. And I
That'd
did
make
not
you
know
cough.
that. She had
Yeah.
a pet cat named Blackie. So I actually put that on the back of the trading card. I slipped that in there. So these are
Good.
like, the trading cards have facts on the back of them. And we're going to give away the set tonight. So you can get an idea of all the work that goes in, these artists do. And I just thank them so much for just we're having fun with it. You know, it's not that we want to be, we want to have fun with it. And I love artwork. So these artists get to express themselves in ways. And the last one, Kenny, the newest slide you can bring up of the tea. Yes, we're going to be raffling this. We're raffling off this too. It's Shelley and Holly designed this. It's a canister and it's tea, Spinster tea.
It's Spinster
Oh,
tea.
I love that name. It's great, very pretty. Shelley's style and my style are totally different, as you can see. Shelley is very beautiful, Victorian lace. Gorgeous.
Well,
Mine is a little
my
bit more
daughter-
profound.
My daughter does all my graphics. I can't
Right.
take credit for those.
Right,
That's Holly.
right. But I do love all the artwork and the time that goes into it. So at the end, we're going to draw some names. Robert, I really enjoyed talking with you, and I'm going to
Oh, it's
pick
been
up.
great.
Yeah, I'm going to keep watching your blog, and it's a really great blog. We'll put the information up for you so you can tune
Great.
in and make comments or whatever you want.
Yeah.
A lot of
I
the
have one-
illustrations. I love the artwork.
I do. In fact, I was just going to chime in. We had a listener, Robert. They want to know how to get your illustrated Bloody Century.
Just
No, actually,
go
no.
to
The images. That's not the Bloody Century.
the book.
It's
Oh
the,
no, yeah, it's Illustrated Murder or Murder Illustrated.
Illustrated. Murder Illustrated. Tell us how to get
Illustrated.
that.
Just go to Murder by Gaslight and subscribe.
Yes.
Just leave your email address, and you'll be sent to a page where you can download the book. It's over 100 illustrations, and
And they're wonderful. Yes.
right from
And
Yes.
from about 1830 to the turn of the century.
Yeah.
Very graphic.
Yeah, I read a few of the stories in the blog, and they're so entertaining. I really enjoy them, and I could read, like, there's a lot of information on your blog, like archived and yeah. So if you want a good true crime story of the 19th century, where gaslight was used,
Yeah.
horse-drawn carriages, no forensics. Great stories.
It's been up for 11 years, and
Wow.
Over 500 murders.
Wow.
We're not all as
500.
famous as Lizzie, but
Well, that's impressive.
Wow. What is your next project, Robert? Are you working on a new book?
I am working on a book about the 1896 murder of Pearl Bryan in Kentucky. She was
Pearl?
Pearl Bryan. She was a
Pearl
daughter
Bryan.
of a wealthy Indiana farmer, and she was found decapitated in the highlands of Kentucky.
Wow, I've
And
never heard of
two-
this one.
Two Cincinnati dental students were charged with the murder, and it gets very complicated.
And what's the title of
three
the book?
states involved. So Far From Home. It's a
So
line
Far
from
From Home.
one of the songs about her to death.
Oh, there's a ballad
There were
connected.
three of them, 3 songs about her.
Wow.
but
Will that be
it
out
was
soon?
maybe by the end of the year. I'm not sure, but
Okay, on
it
my
was, and in
Christmas
time
list.
it was about as big as Lizzie Borden. But as I say, they hung the killers, and all the mystery disappeared. But they didn't know
Interesting.
up until the last day exactly who was going to be hung because they kept changing the stories after denying it for a year. Anyway, I don't want to do the whole story, but
The
Yeah, and
Pearl
that's
Bryant.
amazing.
Yeah.
I find it really amazing how we even have the chance to know about these stories through people writing about them back then. That's the only way. I mean, they didn't have TVs, radio, nothing like that. They just wrote like through memos or
And
letters
ballads.
and
Yeah, and
ballads,
ballads and
right?
poems. That's we're
Yeah.
finding out. Yeah. Huh.
So, all right. So
Fascinating stuff.
we are going to do this drawing. I got the thing here. This is for folks that tuned in. And, okay, so first we'll draw for the trading card set. All right. All right. I got David Wolf. You got the trading card set. Yay! All right. And then we're going to draw for the T. Oh my. Rusty Judd.
Rusty.
Rusty
Oh,
got the
great.
T.
Yes, I know Rusty well. Yeah. I have a
Yay.
question. David wants to know where he can get the tea. This was just a one-time thing we invented for tonight, but maybe I should look into this. This could be a whole new career in my retirement.
Yes, possibly. Possibly. So I want to
Oh,
thank you so much, Robert, for being our guest
thank
tonight. I
you.
really enjoyed talking with you.
great pleasure. I'm so glad I finally got to meet you.
I know all these years.
Yeah, and
So many murders, so little time. I know you've probably got many more
True.
coming.
and
I think so.
we'll keep watching out for you and
You
All right.
bet.
all
I'll
you
keep
do.
tuning in to Lizzie Tea and Murder.
Oh, great! So the
Thank
next one will
you.
be in October.
Yes.
We do it every other month, and I have a special guest, Brian Cano, who is a paranormal investigator, and he's been on Haunted Collector on the Sci-Fi Channel, and also right now on the Travel Channel, he is Paranormal Caught on Camera. So he will be joining us to talk about everything paranormal. Ooh, our Halloween kind of thing.
Tis the season. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll just keep doing this until, we don't. And Shelley, thanks for being a great co-host. I enjoy
Always
talking
a
with you all the
pleasure.
time.
Always a pleasure.
And until
I learn a lot.
yeah, me too. Me too. I'm still always learning. And we will see you next time. Until then, have a August 4th. August 4th is the
Yeah.
128th anniversary, is it? 100 and what year? Anyone? 128?
1992, 129, isn't it?
Maybe
Oh, my
129?
math is so terrible.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's the
Long time
anniversary
ago.
of the
Yeah.
murders, right? So I'm sure
August
you
4th.
guys, you'll be having fun with that. And
Oh, I'll be in Fall River starting Tuesday, and we'll be doing a lot of live streaming on Whoops and Wefts and
yes,
visiting all of the usual spots. And
aren't you doing a trolley? The trolley?
I'm doing a trolley tour,
Yeah.
around Lizzie sites within the city. And, if it's August 4th, that's where you'll find me for the
Yes.
past 30 years now.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
great. I don't know where I'll be. I'll be somewhere. Anyway, until then, we're signing off, and have a great night, everyone. Thank you for being a part of this podcast. We enjoy having you too, and without you, we wouldn't be doing it. So we'll see you later, and see you guys later.
Thank you.
All
Night.
right. All
Good
right. Good
night.
night.
Thanks.